What's going on, everyone? I'm back, and today we're going to continue our look at some more fantasy football mock drafts, specifically an ESPN 12-team PPR mock. The only difference is that we'll be picking towards the end of the first round, right at the 10th pick overall, instead of having a top 5 pick. And I've said it before, I think you can put together a very good roster this year, specifically within the top 5 picks, but also towards the end of the first round. And hopefully that's exactly what we'll see in this exercise. And what I personally like to do in the back end of the first round is, if possible, I like to load up on running backs. Even though we won't have the top 5 or 4 guys available to us, I think there's some very good talent that we can still get there. Guys like an Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Leonard Fournette, Melvin Gordon, Dalvin Cook. I think in that range is the guys you should be targeting. Obviously, if there's someone, a wide receiver, something like that, that falls to you and is incredible value, and in this case, I think the only guys that would come to mind are an Antonio Brown or possibly a DeAndre Hopkins, then you have something to think about. But what I really want to put myself as far as situations go right now is going running back with my first 2 picks, and to see how they'll impact this roster. I want to make the argument that even if you do and go ahead, make those kind of moves, you can still have a very good roster, and not only a very good roster, but an excellent roster. And going to the picks that we've had so far: Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, Todd Gurley, Antonio Brown, Hopkins, Ezekiel Elliott, and then Alvin Kamara. Nothing too surprising here. I'm happy to see David Johnson go in the top 2 right after Le'Veon Bell. Still surprised that Ezekiel Elliott isn't necessarily getting the love that he deserves, being picked after Antonio Brown and DeAndre Hopkins. I really like Ezekiel Elliott. I think I could see him having a better year than Todd Gurley. I do think the Rams will take a little bit of a step back offensively after the league, what I think has probably figured them out to some point, but that'll be an interesting storyline to follow. Regardless, with Ezekiel Elliott and with the Cowboys, great offensive line. We know the story there. Des Bryant gone, Jason Witten gone. I think the Cowboys rely on Elliott a lot more. Him coming back from that suspension, I think that'll be very interesting to watch. I think he'll be extremely motivated, and then I think ultimately that will translate into a very good fantasy football season. Then we had Alvin Kamara go, followed by Julio Jones. A little bit surprised that Julio Jones was selected with the 8th pick overall. I've seen, honestly, Julio go even at the start of the second round, which I think is, incredible value for a player like Julio Jones. But I think it's just a reflection of what we saw last year in people not wanting to necessarily take a risk on him. But Julio Jones is still an elite receiver. That was followed up by Odell Beckham. And maybe we're seeing a little bit of a hesitation to take a guy like Saquon Barkley, a rookie running back, which is exactly what I did here. Because, he doesn't have that tape in the NFL level quite yet. But regardless, the Giants did spend the 2nd overall pick in the first round in this year's draft on him. And they haven't had a good running back in years. Obviously, Odell is still on that team. So there are 2 superstars and 2 potential guys that you have to, worry about where the point's going to come from. But if the Giants follow the model that the Steelers have laid, having both Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, which I think is what they're envisioning with Barkley and Odell, there's no reason that fantasy owners should be worried about that. I think in a PPR league, Saquon Barkley is even more valuable. So I'm very happy with my pick. I did obviously pick him above guys like Dalvin Cook, Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt was ranked above him. My concerns with Kareem Hunt, honestly, the main ones being, obviously, he started out the season on a tear like we haven't seen, and then he went cold and extremely cold, and then revived himself towards the end of the season. And the question is, how bad was it? Well, there were points where people were, trading Kareem Hunt away, for practically nothing in return. And the lesson in that is, that'll always happen with some players. A team loses patience in him, or whatnot. But the point being is, I think there's way too many question marks with a guy like Kareem Hunt versus someone like Leonard Fournette or Melvin Gordon. I had the opportunity to right now select Melvin Gordon, and I absolutely jumped on it. Personally, I like him above guys like Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook, the issue there, coming off of that ACL injury, there's no guarantee he's going to be the same. But I will say, for all the people that are very high on him, he could have very well been the best running back in his draft class if he didn't get hurt. Because, before Alvin Kamara burst onto the scene, Dalvin Cook, with the limited starts that he had, was playing extremely good football. But then obviously his injury put an end to that. Having Melvin Gordon, in my opinion, is a bonus and a plus above some of these other players because he is in his fifth-year option. He's going to be playing for a contract, for whether it be for the Chargers or for some other team. He's a good pass catcher, and he gets into the end zone, which is something he earned a reputation for last season. So I'm very happy with my first two selections, Saquon Barkley, and then having a veteran in Melvin Gordon. I would even have been happy with Melvin Gordon as my running back number one if I had gone a different kind of draft strategy here, and then gone wide receiver with my second pick overall. So, that kind of shows you how I value Melvin Gordon. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I do think that he will put some things together and have a very good year. The Chargers offense is very good, very potent, and I think that will lead to a lot of points being scored. Looking at some of the other players that have gone, Keenan Allen, LaShawn McCoy, AJ Green, AJ Green being taken in the middle of that second round, kind of highlighting him because he is a big name, and I think he's still a top wide receiver. So point being is you can still get very good value with a guy like AJ Green towards the end or middle of the second round. And that, again, is all based off perception from last year. But I really do think the Bengals made some moves that will ultimately improve their roster a lot by improving that offensive line after they saw how much they struggled last year in that department. Then we have Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Gronk. I'm a little bit surprised with Gronk going with the 9th pick in the second round. I would have personally gone with guys like Devontae Freeman, Christian McCaffrey above him. I could have even gone with a guy like Doug Baldwin above him. There's guys still like Jerick McKinnon, Joe Mixon. Obviously the thought is that Gronk, being the number one tight end, he will provide you pretty much a wide receiver number one at the tight end position, and not having to worry about a tight end and having to stream guys week in and week out is a very big reliever. So I understand the thought process here. I just personally would have waited for a Gronk selection in the 3rd round. But regardless, let's get back to our list of players available because we are back on the clock. We had Doug Baldwin go. I'm a big fan of Doug Baldwin, especially with how the situation is playing itself out in Seattle with some of the playmakers at the wide receiver position leaving. I think he'll return to being a very good wide receiver and a guy that you can get in the 3rd round that has wide receiver 1 potential. I think you automatically have to go ahead and get. We see Aaron Rodgers. There will be players and teams that select a quarterback in the 3rd round. That won't be me, but regardless, I know we will all find ourselves in that situation. Instead, what I did is I went what I believe to be the best player overall in Joe Mixon. Now, I realize that I went 3 running backs in a row, and that could possibly put me in a very big bind when it comes to the wide receiver position. But I really did think that Joe Mixon was the best player available. And looking at my 3 players that I went with, I think I have incredible versatility at the running back position. And I really like having a running back at the flex spot. I think they offer a lot more upside than a wide receiver. And Joe Mixon, with Jeremy Hill gone, and now him presumably being the main guy there, I think he will continue to rise. We saw his stock kind of go up toward the end of last year, and I think this is very good value for Joe Mixon at the end of the 3rd round. But enough of that. At this point, we know we need a wide receiver, and I would have loved to go Stephon Diggs. Instead, what we're going to do is go with Josh Gordon. Again, I think he's a player that has a very high ceiling, but the big question mark here is, will he be able to stay on the field? And as far as this mock draft is concerned, I'm drafting as if the season starts today. And if that's the case, Josh Gordon is eligible to play. And we all know how much of a beast he is. And whoever is quarterback under center will absolutely know Josh Gordon is present on that football field. And, maybe there's some concern that Jarvis Landry will take away some of those targets. But I will say Landry is still new to that system. I think Gordon has a leg up on him. I think Gordon is the more dominant wide receiver, the bigger red zone threat. So that's why I like Josh Gordon. I think he has the potential to be a wide receiver number 1. And if that pans out, I think that's very good value for a 4th round selection at the wide receiver level. Now, I know who I would love to come back to me in the 5th round, and that's Juju Smith, but I don't think there's any chance that happens. I pretty much knew that when I was picking Josh Gordon, I had to say goodbye to a player that I also really liked, and that is the one caveat when you have picks towards either the first half or right the first part of the draft or towards the end of that round, because if there's guys that you really, really like, you will more than likely have to reach for them, because Juju Smith is ranked as the 52nd best player overall, but I went ahead and selected Josh Gordon with about the the 40th pick, somewhere around there. And you see here, Juju Smith went in the 5th round with the 2nd pick overall. I've honestly seen him go towards the start of the 4th round, and if he goes in the 5th round, I think that's very good value. Obviously, we see Julian Edelman being selected here, but I think that's more of a factor that these rankings haven't been updated and some of these people have gone on auto pick. Obviously, with that 4-game suspension that was announced for Julian Edelman, that will knock him down probably several rounds. I know he is a PPR stud, but I do think this will be a huge hit. Similar to a Mark Ingram, it's very hard to talk yourself into selecting a player that will be suspended for an initial part of the season, because you pretty much, if it's 4 games, just because that is the example we're mentioning right now, you're going to be missing him for about a 3rd or a 4th of the season. So for that reason being, a guy like Julian Edelman and Mark Ingram should theoretically fall a lot further than they're being drafted, specifically in this mock draft. Now, let's go back to our big board. We've got guys like Robert Woods, Emmanuel Sanders, Pierre Garçon, Marvin Jones, and obviously we're aching for another wide receiver. And best player available, it might not be based on the rankings, but I have Marvin Jones as my top wide receiver still left on the board. I really like what he did with Matthew Stafford towards the end of the season. I liked what I saw from him in terms of red zone targets and over 1,000 yards. I think, honestly, that's all you can ask for when it comes to a wide receiver number 2, and that's what I'm drafting him as right now. As far as some other players that I would have considered at that spot, I know Robert Woods was a very popular name last year, but I do have my concerns with him this year, specifically because there are so many mouths to feed in the Rams offense. You still have Todd Gurley. You've added Brendan Cooks. Cooper Kupp was a very nice surprise last year, and you've got Robert Woods. One of those guys is going to take a step back, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's Robert Woods. You would think that the Rams prioritize a young guy like Cooper Kupp, who looked very good. You think they would prioritize a guy that they traded a 1st-round pick for in Brendan Cooks. You would think that they still have a lot of focus on Todd Gurley, who is an absolute stud offensive player of the year. So for that reason, I think the logical choice for the player to take a step back is Robert Woods. Now coming back to us though, because of that quick turnaround, we could go Pierre Garçon, and honestly, he was a player that I liked last year. But with the 49ers adding some more talent offensively, I think Garçon should go a little bit lower than this. And what I'm going to do instead here is going to draft another skill position guy. And sometimes this is what you have to do when you haven't selected a position for a while. You have to back up that position a little bit more heavily, even if the rankings say it might be a reach. But a guy in Devontae Parker that I went with, he was a hot name last year, but this year with Jarvis Landry gone, honestly, that offense could very well be his. Ryan Tannehill is back. That chemistry should be there. He's a better quarterback, Tannehill, than Jay Cutler was. So I think Devontae Parker should benefit from that. And although he will be, as of right now, a bench player, I do think Devontae Parker has some very nice potential. And, when you get to the 6th round, that's kind of what you want to be focusing on. You can either decide to go ahead and try and shape up and fill out the rest of your roster, or you can draft high ceiling guys, which in this situation I thought I would rather do. Other guys that I would have probably considered, a Deshaun Watson, a Cam Newton to fill out that quarterback position. Obviously, Deshaun Watson coming off of his own ACL injury. There's question marks there. Cam Newton, new offensive coordinator. Will he be running less? Will he be trying to be turned into a pure passer? We know that doesn't work well for Cam Newton. So too many question marks for me there. Panthers, I don't think they did a good job of addressing that offensive line. So for that reason, I'm staying away from the quarterback position, and I'm going to try and address it maybe right now. And honestly, to be frank with you guys, I'll probably have 2 more selections here, and I'll conclude this roster tuning up, because after that, with so many people on auto pick, it kind of gets to be a crapshoot, especially with mock drafts. And I think at this point we have gotten a very good idea of what the core of this roster will look like. And if I had to pick a tight end that I would target right now, I really like a Jordan Reed. Obviously, if he can stay healthy, that's the big thing here. That's always been his MO. And if he does stay healthy, I really like the potential. The reason for that is, Alex Smith now in Washington, he has an incredible history with success with his tight ends. If you look back with the 49ers, Vernon Davis, then Travis Kelce in Kansas City. And I think he can do the same for a guy like Jordan Reed. And I know I said I'll probably go ahead and try and round out this roster, but I can't pass up on a guy like Marlon Mack in the end of the 7th round. And, maybe I shot myself a little bit in the foot there because Jordan Reed was the next player selected. But regardless, I really like my selection of Marlon Mack. If he pans out like I think he will, I think he will be a very sneaky addition. And honestly, he's a guy that I'm targeting on a lot of my rosters. If there's a guy like that you like, that you have a sneaky suspicion might be very good, go ahead. I would say take a chance on him. If that means drafting him a little bit early, go ahead, do it. But for now, we'll go back to some other areas of need. And a guy that I'm going to go ahead and select at the tight end position is actually Kyle Rudolph. I know this is early, but the reason I went with Kyle Rudolph, all reports coming out of Minnesota is that, the quarterback play with Kirk Cousins there has improved tremendously. All the pass catchers have improved, and I think that'll benefit Kyle Rudolph. Another guy that I could have gone with, Jimmy Graham. I think he'll have success in Green Bay. It'll be interesting to see, but I think the Kyle Rudolph is a little bit more of the secure pick here. But with all that being said, I think this roster has shaped up nicely. The only thing that is really left as far as starting roster goes is a quarterback. And a guy that I really like that can be gotten later on, depending on what interface you're drafting on, is Jimmy Garoppolo. Andrew Luck just went, but I really like the potential of a Jimmy Garoppolo. I like how this roster has turned out. Saquon Barkley, Melvin Gordon, Joe Mixon are my starting running backs. Absolutely love that group of guys. Then Josh Gordon, Marvin Jones. I think both those guys, if they can put up a solid 15 points per week, they will be doing exactly what they should be. And then having Devontae Parker and Marlon Mack on my roster as well. Both very good bench players. So with that being said, let me know what you guys thought. Did you like the draft overall? Did you like my selections? How do you think this roster turned out with me having the 10th pick overall? Because that's what the real test was here, trying to prove that you can put together a very good roster with that 10th pick overall, especially if you go running back. So let me know what you guys thought. Let me hear it in the comments section. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.